They call Pluckley England's most haunted village. Narrow lanes hemmed by ancient beech copses, a parish church spire that pierces fog like a finger, a scattering of thatched roofs, and a pub where the regulars keep a wary eye on strangers after dark. It's the kind of place that looks polite in daylight and like it might swallow you whole when the moon drops its silver across the churchyard. Tonight, we'll walk those lanes in the dark and listen to 10 accounts, reported encounters, local legends, witnesses' recreations, each one leaving a different kind of bruise. Sleepless nights, sudden moves, ritual candles left at stones no one can explain. A word before we start. What follows are reported encounters and oral histories, reconstructions of what people say happened. None of this is presented as proof. These are the moments people in Pluckley still wake for, the things that make the pub hush when someone mentions Sandy Lane. 1. The shadow on the lane. It began with the birds falling silent. Sandy Lane is a narrow ribbon of tarmac that cuts between hedgerows so tall they press light out of the road. On late autumn nights, the hedges give off the smell of crushed leaves and damp earth, and the moonline can turn the lane into a strip of polished metal. The witness in this case was a postgraduate student, out walking to clear his mind late after a term paper, walking back toward the village past midnight. He was the sort who noticed small things, the way the puddles held moonlight, the faint scrape of a fox on the verge. He told the story over tea at the pub, voice low. It was as if something had turned the world down, he said. The owls stopped answering each other. The hedges, they were so still, like someone had nailed them to silence. Recreation, witness account. I rounded the bend and saw him. No, not a man, a shape. A column of dark at the edge of the road, standing where the hedge dipped. At first I thought it was a tree branch, a gap in the hedge. Then it stepped out into the lane. It was tall, taller than any man, narrow like a silhouette of a coat rack. No feet shuffled, it just moved, a smooth, gliding thing without noise. I remember my throat tightening. My legs wouldn't answer. The cold came in through the soles of my boots like the road itself had gone icy. He heard no footsteps. He heard no breath. Only the low, absurd hum of his heartbeat. He managed to take one step backward, and as if offended, the figure tilted its head. In the beam of his phone, it became a darker absence, a place where light seemed to thin. Then it moved, too quick, slipping sideways into the hedge as if the hedge were water. He ran, stumbling the last 100 yards to his door, palms smudged with hedge sap. Aftermath. He stopped taking late walks. Nights stretched longer. He said he kept seeing that tall emptiness in dreams, a man-shaped hole that watched him while he slept. Locals nodded when he told them. They'd heard similar accounts, always at hours when the lane should have been empty and the hedgerows should have been doing nothing but breathing. If these stories pull you in, hit subscribe and ring the bell. There are more of them coming, and the village keeps producing its own kind of hush. 2. The Screaming Woman at the Ford. It was the sort of crossing that looks harmless by day, a shallow ford where a trickle of water crosses the lane and ducks over pebbles beside a low stone wall. Near that ford, the hedges close in and a small pond bogs into reeds. In certain nights, mist gathers there and the world becomes a watercolor smear. The witness was a taxi driver, outsider, familiar with the A road into Pluckley but not with the late-night folklore. He picked up a fare outside the village and took a detour when the passenger asked to be let off near the old ford. The clock on the dash read 2 something in the morning. The radio had gone to static. The cab's heater clicked, as if trying to hold on to warmth. Recreation, witness account. I dropped him at the turning for the Ford. He got out and said thanks in this small, soft voice. I watched him walk for a few paces, and then I heard it. A sound like a woman having all the air ripped from her at once. Not a cry, something worse, a long, keening note that made the hairs on my arms stand up. It came from the Ford. I thought someone had fallen in. I closed the cab door and got out. The air felt wet and heavy, like a blanket soaked through. The driver described the woman as wearing something white. Not the bright, pure white of a dress, more the grayed cloth of mourning. She was standing in the shallows, water lapping around her knees, and she was screaming without opening her mouth. An impossible thinness to the sound, like something trying to escape from a jar. When the driver took a step closer, he said, the scream folded into a soft, pleading whisper. Her head tilted back, and her mouth was empty. Where eyes should have been were reflections of the Ford itself. He felt as if the road had tilted, and his stomach had dropped. He ran back to his cab. For a while, he said, the air smelled of old leaves and the tang of metal, something like iron. When he drove away, the scream followed him in his ears for miles, like the memory of the sound embedded in the car's upholstery. Customers now ask if he does night runs. Sometimes he says yes, sometimes he takes a different route. Local note. Farmers and anglers on the A Road have their own names for a woman seen near water. Some call her the River Street Bride. Others say she's the mourner who never left. No one agrees on why she returns. Whatever explanation is offered, the Ford retains the silvery smear of her presence, enough that drivers slow down, then speed away, leaving the Ford to its whispers. 3. The haunting doll at the old station. The old station platform is the kind of place that collects things and memories. Disused benches, a faded timetable nailed to a lamppost, the rusted teeth of a fence. Children used to play there. Teenagers use it for dares. One spring evening, a group of them went there with torches and the usual bravado. The witness who told this tale later, reluctantly with a quiet shame, was one of those teenagers. He agreed to speak only with his name changed. He'd been the one who found the doll. Recreation, witness account. We joked about ghosts and dared each other. I was shining my torch along the platform planks when something pale flashed at my feet. It was a doll, a small thing, its cotton dress stained gray, its hair a tangle. Its eyes were glass, and one was cracked. The smile was stitched too wide, a too perfect grin. I picked it up. It smelled faintly of liver-bed mud and something sweet, like old candy. They left it on the bench to laugh about it, but the teens reported that during the walk back, one of them turned and swore the doll sat up and looked at him. That night, a dog in the village whined continuously for hours. The boy who found it took the doll home. Curiosity, a dare, a childish urge to keep the thing. He said that night he dreamt of a child crying on a platform, and the doll's mouth moving like it was speaking without sound. The next day, the doll was back on the bench. He didn't put it there. He had locked his bedroom door. The family had seen him by the window, pale, one hand pressed to his mouth. When he went to the platform, it was gone. That day, neighbors said they found pennies laid along the concrete near the lamppost, small offerings in a neat line, as if someone had been trying to buy silence. Aftermath. The boy eventually gave the doll to an acquaintance who used to collect broken toys. The acquaintance left it in a box at the back of a shed. A month later, the box had moved, the lid pushed aside. He moved away from Pluckley for a year. He told us it wasn't just about the doll. The nights came with a pressure, like someone pressing a hand on the chest. When he speaks about it now, he rubs his knuckles and looks at the floor. The platform keeps swallowing objects like a mouth with no teeth. Locals later claim to find things dumped there that weren't there before. Charred ribbon, a child's Wellington, a single shoe. 4. The silent churchyard. There's a small church at the village's heart, stone and lichen, a cemetery hemmed with yew, and a cross that has been there long enough for the edges to round. In the DNA of English villages, churchyards are marrow, holding bones, stories, and the work of decades. At night, under the boughs of yews, the air can fall away, and the soundscape thins to a single sharp note. The witness was a graveyard keeper, someone who tended lawns and cut brambles, who worked in hours when the village was asleep. He preferred the honesty of his job, the routine. He said the churchyard had moods. Some nights it felt empty as a clock, some nights crowded with things not moving. Recreation, witness account. I came in early to prune a yew and found a circle of stones with flowers fresh as if put there that morning. The bells were still warm on the air from the evening service, though no one had been there. The odd thing was the silence. No insects, no distant dog barking, nothing. I moved to pick up an old hymn sheet that had been left on a gravestone and heard it, this low whispering, like mouths moving behind a wall. I thought it was the wind. Then I heard a name. A woman's voice said, clearly, only my name. It was as if the dead had learned how to say it. He described a statue nearby, a stone woman carved with a veil, hands folded, whose face caught the weak light and seemed wrong. Once, he said, he approached to clear ivy and thought the statue's head had turned. He slammed the shears down and walked away. Later, parishioners reported the statue with scratches at its base, little gouges as if from claws or tools. Aftermath. The keeper started lying about his shifts. The church hired others for after-dark work. Some of the older congregations started leaving coins on certain stones, quietly, at dawn. They called it a small gesture, an offering, a way to make peace. In the months after the incident, the keeper admitted he began waking at 3 in the morning with the taste of metal in his mouth and the soft certainty that someone was sitting on his bed. Context note. Churchyards invite a certain language. People in Pluckley use words like restless and unsettled rather than haunted. Small, deliberate euphemisms meant to keep the village from naming what they fear. 5. Taxi drivers' last fare. If you've ever taken a late-night cab through rural Kent, you know the loneliness of country roads. Streetlights die, ditched lanes open like mouths, and the cab's interior becomes its own small world. In this account, the witness is another taxi driver, different from the Ford driver, who made a late run from the pub. He had a reputation for being steady, a man who knew the A-roads and how to coax a murmuring engine back to life. He picked up a fare outside the Biddenden Arms. The name is used here as a local shorthand. It stands in for the village pub atmosphere more than a specific building. The passenger was slight and sat in the back, hands folded in his lap, and gave an address that led past the old mill and closer to the edge of the village. Recreation, witness account. He was the quietest passenger I'd had. No phone, no cigarette. As we left the main road, there was this pressure in the cab. The radio flicked between stations, snatches of an old hymn, a cricket score, then went flat. I glanced in the mirror, and for a beat, the back seat was empty. I thought he'd left at the last driveway, and I'd missed him. I pulled over, I called out, no answer. The scent of something, lavender I think, then not lavender, hung low like someone had sprayed it and left the can in the car. When he turned back on the lights, the seat was occupied again. The man was closer to the window this time, face half in shadow. The driver said the face was wrong. It had too much paleness, and the eyes seemed to reflect, like glass. The silhouette didn't look like it had mass so much as a suggestion of mass. The jacket hung without weight. When he stopped at a bend, the passenger turned to him and said nothing, then mouthed a name like thanks. The driver's radio jumped and the speedometer shivered. When he looked down, the odometer showed 3 miles more than he should have driven, though the trip had taken 10 minutes. When he finally stopped and turned, the back seat was empty. No one on the roadside, no footprints. Aftermath. The driver reported the event to the dispatcher, but was brushed off. The call log had a gap. His fare was recorded as never having been picked up. He refused to take late fares for a time. Then he took a night job in a neighboring town. The memory sat like grit in his teeth. Some nights his family said he would grind his teeth in his sleep, whispering the name the passenger had mouthed. Melancholy note: the village has a long list of supposed last fares, rides that end with an empty back seat, with a time discrepancy, with a smell left behind. For drivers, those small anomalies add up into a job hazard that has nothing to do with roadworks. 6. The pub door that won't lock. The village pub is supposed to be a place of warmth, low beams, a fire in winter, the clink of glasses. But pubs also store stories like sponges. One landlady described the sound as a memory of things. The witness here is a young barmaid who took over closing duties one winter, pushing locks and counting the till beneath breath steamed by her own nerves. Recreation. Witness account. It was nearly closing, just me and the landlord. I locked the back door and checked the windows. We clicked off lights. I went to the front, turned the key. It wouldn't hold. The lock turned but slid back like someone pressed it open with their hand. I tried again. Same. The door felt colder than it should have, like it had been sitting open in November. Then, from the yard, there was a sound like someone breathing hard. An animal, I thought. I opened the door slightly to look, and there was no one, just the road and the lamp post, the pub sign creaking in a wind that hadn't been there a second before. Later, she would find chairs arranged differently, a glass on the counter that she was sure she had set on the bar. Once, she swore she felt a presence in the doorway, someone asking to be let in, only to have the door slam on its own and the bolt snap home. After that night, she refused to be alone closing. The landlord, a practical man, chalked it up to drafts and a temperamental old lock. But he had a habit of pushing the bolt twice before he left. Aftermath. Customers would sometimes report feeling watched when they sat near the fireplace, or a heaviness by the door that made them cross themselves under their breath. Little gestures to ward off something they couldn't name. Sometimes a patron would catch sight of a figure in the reflection of the window and blink, thinking it was the pub cat, only to look and find the cat asleep on its blanket. Small local fact. Pubs in villages like Pluckley are where gossip becomes history. A landlord tells something once, it's retold in different language. In a week, it's a legend. That doesn't make the experiences less real to those who live them. For the barmaid, the experience left a hole of caution. She left the village a few months later, citing a new job further south. 7. The vanishing walkers. There's a stretch of footpath that follows a line of old hedgerows where walkers pass in pairs and young dog walkers gather at dusk. Several people spoke about seeing shapes at the edge of the greenery, figures that watched and did not move, or moved with a curious jerking stillness. The witnesses are varied. A couple walking home from a late supper, an elderly gardener locking up his allotment, a teenager out for a cigarette. Each account has the same anatomy. The birds fall silent. A presence appears at the lip of the hedgerow. Something in the air thickens. Recreation, witness account. We were coming down the path, my boyfriend holding my hand, and we saw someone standing by the hedge. At first, we thought it was a passerby. Then we realized the figure had no features, no face, just a darkness where a face should have been. And it was so still, I thought it was a scarecrow. My breath fogged, and when the figure moved, it wasn't walking. It slid. It stepped, and the light didn't touch it the same way. We started to cross the road to give it space, and it was gone. No footway disturbances, nothing in the grass, just the sense that it had been there, watchful. Sometimes the watchers would vanish into the fog like a bar of black smoke pulled through the hedge. Other times they would stand and let you pass, and afterward people reported a smell lingering, like wet wool and something rotted in a trunk. One gardener said his dog refused to step past a certain gate for a week. Another reported that the figure had laughed, a sound like a twig snapped underfoot, though no mouth was seen. Aftermath? Walkers started to change routines. Earlier walks instead of later ones, different routes, more calls home. People who saw the watchers often dreamed dreams where they were trapped in hedgerows, unable to speak. An elderly couple who'd lived in Pluckley for decades sold their cottage after a series of small incidents. Pots moved on the stove, a radio turning on in the night. 8. The fog that follows. Fog in Kent is not unusual, but the fog that follows is something else entirely. Witnesses tell of a bank of white that arrives by no apparent wind, washing in little by little and swallowing sound. Within the fog, people say, the rules of distance and direction blur. A voice heard from close beside you can fingerprint itself as a voice from a long way off. One night, a local teacher was driving home from a school event. The road was familiar. The car's headlights cut a tunnel through the dark. The teacher described the fog as almost tactile, clinging to the paint like wool. Recreation, witness account. The fog came up sudden, thick as milk. I turned my indicator and the car shuddered. There was a sound, at first a murmur, like someone whispering names. Then I heard footsteps, soft, pacing, coming from the verge. I slowed. I felt certain someone had crossed behind me, yet when I peered, there was nothing but white. Then a voice said my name, right up close, like someone was leaning on the roof of the car. I froze. My hands went cold on the wheel. When the fog cleared, there was a single boot print in the mud that went nowhere, as if someone had stopped mid-stride and been taken. Within the fog, people reported hearing their own voices echoed, or the muffled cadence of distant church bells that no one else could locate. Radio signals would die in the mist, clocks would lose a few minutes, and the animals, foxes, owls, would fall silent, as if the world contained itself. Aftermath. For weeks after the teacher's drive, kids at the school refused to walk home alone. Parents drove round the lanes more often. The teacher took a sabbatical later that year. He said the fog had left him with a hollow feeling, like someone had taken a small, necessary part of him. 9. The old milestone. There is a stone at the crossroad, set back from the tarmac, and smoothed by weather. People in the village had always noticed it, but rarely paid it mind. Over the span of years, it began to attract small, inexplicable votives, twigs, coins, wax trapped on the top like tiny suns. Some folk confessed to leaving a trinket if they'd felt watched. Others swore they had one placed there in the night and found it gone the next day. A woman who worked at a farm near the crossroad told a story of finding a ring of strangers' items around the stone and, curiously, a scent of camphor. Recreation, witness account. I walk past that milestone every morning. One day I found a neat circle, pieces of thread, a chipped thimble, a child's marble. Whoever had placed them had done it with care. I picked up a coin, small and worn, and felt like the stone looked right at me. That night I dreamed the road was a throat and the houses were teeth. I woke up and a small piece of cloth was under my pillow. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe it felt like a promise or a warning. Aftermath. Some villagers began to leave small offerings themselves, a last attempt to bargain, to claim dominion over what they could not explain. Others began to carry a coin or a lucky charm while passing the stone, superstition as a means of arranging the world into a pattern that makes sense. 10. The farewell at dawn for later. There are mornings in Pluckley when the dawn arrives and a stranger's breath hangs above the pews in the church, or a hat is found on the wall of a lane with no owner. People keep their eyes open in those hours because things in the village have a habit of making their exits visible, like a tide receding, leaving peculiar shells. We'll come back to the final stories, the ones that tie the previous ones into a late-night sort of logic, because they require a long breath. For now, listen to what these 9 accounts have in common: a silence that announces the apparition, an anchor, a doll, a door, a stone, that holds the story in place, and a lasting human cost. People don't just see something and go on with their lives. Sleep phrase, friendships strain, jobs are given up. The hauntings aren't always violent. Most often, they're like a pressure that makes ordinary life difficult to hold. Across the reports, there is a pattern. The landscape itself seems complicit. Hedges that become walls, fog that thickens into a presence, water that reflects an absence. The village is a character in all these stories, its lanes, churchyard, ford, pub, platform, each a stage on which something chooses to appear. There's a line the locals use, muttered as a defense. Some places keep the wrong kind of memory. It's not an answer. It's a way of naming discomfort so you can carry on. But naming does not make the memory less wrong. On a winter morning, someone will find a coin at the ford and think it's a child's prank. A landlord will fix the pub's door and chalk it up to wear. A teenager will decide the doll is just a toy. A guardian will sweep a church path clean. That first reaction, reason, holds until the repetition becomes thicker than coincidence. That is when people start to change how they move through the village. They leave lights on, they cross to the other side of the lane, they plan routes that bypass a certain bend. And yet, curiosity stays. Even as people move away or close their curtains earlier, others come. Ghost hunters, late-night drivers, scholars with notebooks. They come because Pluckley's name has spread. They come because some part of the human animal requires an explanation, even if it is only to place the experience into a tidy category. Tonight, walking back out toward Sandy Lane, the hedgerows seem to lean in a little closer than they did earlier. Somewhere close, a dog barks once, long and flat, and then the village exhales and the night takes its time. The road ahead is a black seam with a sliver of moon at the edges. The stories gathered so far sit like stones in your pocket, cold, impossible to ignore. There are more accounts to tell. The face seen in the window of an empty cottage, the small shrine at the edge of a beech copse, the voice on a late radio promising to be where you are. Each one threads another needle through the village's cloth, tightening the weave. If you've ever walked a lane at 3 in the morning and felt watched, you'll know how every small sound takes on weight. Pluckley's weight is not always heavy. Sometimes it's a whisper, sometimes the ache of a memory. The remaining stories live in that same space between a noise and the meaning you add to it. 10. The farewell at dawn. It happens in the hour when the village is still like a held breath, the lamps guttering out, the early milk cart rattling, a pale seam of light lifting over the ridge. People in Pluckley speak of this hour in careful, small sentences. Best not to be out then. That's when things move. And they say it with the sort of half-smile that tries to be practical and only just fails. The witness who told the central pattern of this final story is the churchwarden, a woman who long ago learned the church's rhythms and the village's silences. She is the person who unlocks the lich gate and polishes the brass, who sets out hymn books on Sundays and knows which pew will hold whose name. She agreed to speak on the record with her name changed to keep the detail modest and safe. Her account ties together several minor occurrences that, on their own, might have been shrugged off. Lost hats, a forgotten coat, a hat on the wall. But together formed a string of small theatrics people in the village could not explain. Recreation, witness account. I walk in before the dawn sometimes to light the candles and make sure the church smells as it always did. Wax, old wood, the faint wool of hymn books. That morning it was almost cold enough that my breath sat like smoke. I unlocked the west door, and there, on the lich gate post, was a hat. An old tweed cap, mud on the brim and a bit of hay stuck to it. It wasn't moved by wind, it just sat there, as if someone had been and put it down for a minute. I pocketed the hat and set it on the vestry table. Then I opened the church to walk through, to see if anyone needed arranging. The pews looked ordinary, but on the altar rail someone had left a single white ribbon, not tied, just draped. It looked like a ribbon from a child's hair. The bells had not yet begun for morning. As I stood there, all quiet, I thought I heard the soft sound of footsteps in the tower, like someone climbing. Then a pause, as if to listen. No one was there when I called up. I put the ribbon with the hat, thinking perhaps a congregation member had a jesting streak. That afternoon, an old man who walks by the lane every day, he keeps odd hours, collects newspapers for recycling, came into church and asked if we'd seen his hat. He had been up at dawn, he said, and his hat was missing from his peg. Recreation, witness account. Recreation, witness account. I picked up the first hat and felt a cold, like someone had breathed over it. I opened the inside and found a scrap of cloth. As I did, a bird took off from the hedge, and the sound was enormous, like a curtain being pulled. I let out a little shout, more from surprise, and that's when more people began to come. The churchwarden with her key, the milkman, a neighbor who had walked his dog. We all looked at each other like people caught doing something they'd rather not explain. We stood there, a ring of people, and for a minute none of us could speak. The hats were old, used, and they smelled faintly of cold smoke and hay. There was no sign of who had left them. We each had a memory of something similar, small things that had arrived and been placed as if someone took care to tidy up before they went. The churchwarden bent and gathered the kernels. She put the coins in her palm, tucked the scraps into her apron. No one wanted to carry them home. The milkman said he had a sense of relief, like a door being closed. Then, as the light widened, the hedgerows seemed to breathe, and a pane of fog lifted from the distant field as if someone had drawn a hand through it. We all felt it, that moment between dusk and daylight that is not entirely day and not entirely night. Then the lane returned to being itself, the sound of a far-off engine, a dog barking, and the morning continued, ordinary again in all visible ways. Aftermath. A string of small, strange effects. Gardeners found seed heads placed on windowsills. An old woman found her husband's whistle left on a bench she'd walked past every day for 10 years. A teenager found a folded paper with a single sentence inside in an old handwriting that read, "Forgive the taking of moonlight." Nobody could say what that meant. It sat like a riddle that did not want solving. The emotional weight of these quiet acts was perhaps greatest in the way they unsettled trust in ordinary things. People began locking doors a little earlier, covering their hats on pegs, tucking small valuables into drawers rather than leaving them on tables. There was no violence, no threat in the act. Instead, the village felt as if it had been included, in the strictest of terms, in an intimate goodbye. That intimacy brought comfort to some, an inexplicable closure, and a deeper, colder unease to others. the sense that the village's boundaries were more porous than they had assumed. A pattern emerges. Across all 10 accounts, those we detailed earlier and this last string of dawn farewells, certain contours appear again and again. First, a silence that arrives not as absence, but as a presence. It's thick and textured, pressing down on ears and bones, and making familiar noises vanish. Second, an anchor, an object, a place, a shape that takes the story and holds it. The Ford holds the woman in white. The platform keeps returning the doll. The milestone accepts coins and thread. Third, the human cost. Not flames and blood, but sleeplessness, trauma that nudges people into leaving, husbands and wives arguing about sanity, teenagers who stop daring each other and begin to whisper. These patterns feel like a grammar for the uncanny in Pluckley. They are the village's own vocabulary for how something stays. The place provides words, hedge, ford, pew, and the story writes itself upon them. Interlude, a note on Pluckley's reputation. Pluckley's label as England's most haunted village has a kind of gravity. It brings curiosity, it brings tourists in camper vans and scholarly types with notebooks. It brings people who want evidence and people who want a thrill. For residents, the attention is ambivalent. Some enjoy the extra trade at the pub and the money that comes with postcards and ghost walks. Others resent the cameras and the shoes on the church path. More than one villager told us that the real discomfort is the way strangers start to measure their grief and fear as a spectacle. It's worth remembering the boundaries of what we can say. These are reported encounters and oral histories. They are not presented as confirmation of any particular metaphysical claim. They are the things people in a community carry with them and tell one another in the quiet between chores. They are the reasons some people turn their heads when the mist comes in and why others start to leave small offerings without naming why. Small rituals, quiet defenses. When ordinary explanation falters, when repetition shows that randomness is no longer a satisfying answer, people form rituals. In Pluckley, these are modest and private. A penny placed on a stone at dawn, a matchstick laid on a bench, a candle left at a milestone with a rough name and time scrawled on an envelope. The rituals are not touted or advertised. They are exchanges that make people feel less like observers and more like participants. One of the more poignant rituals reported was by a schoolteacher who told of a circle of mothers placing a small sprig of rosemary on the churchyard stones after one child's repeated bad dreams. It wasn't religion, she said. It was an agreement to look after that corner of the world. The rosemary, she said, seemed to work in a way she couldn't measure. The dreams lessened for a time, the child's sleep steadied. Whether that was the rosemary or the adult's attention, the village began to buy into the idea that attentiveness itself might change the balance. Psychological aftermath. Physical evidence in these stories is patchy. There are no smoking guns. What is clearer and far more painful is the human fallout. Witnesses report the loss of sleep, the creeping sense of being watched, the change of route, and the altered cadence of everyday life. Some people move away. Others find themselves turning to specialists, doctors for insomnia, therapists for intrusive memories. One woman we interviewed, who asked not to be named, spoke openly about the way the episodes intruded on her life. Recreation, witness account. After I saw what I thought was a woman in white by the ford, nights were different. I'd wake and the room would be full of a kind of soundless pressure. I couldn't turn my head quickly without a sense like a finger on my back. I went to the doctor. He said anxiety, prescribed sleep hygiene and some tablets. They helped a little. But more than the sleeplessness was a kind of shaming. You feel silly for being afraid of a road, so you don't tell people, and then the fear nests inside you. It makes you small, like you're carrying a private shame. This is one of the cruelties of such local lore. It isolates. People feel that to speak openly is to invite ridicule, so they shrink the experience into private language. Others find a community in shared stories. The pub's bar stools hold more confessions than the church pews, and that can be the beginning of repair. A practical note on witness reliability. In telling these stories, there is a tension worth stating plainly. Humans are fallible. Memory is porous. Perception is skewed by fatigue, alcohol, grief, and expectation. Many of the Pluckley tales come from witnesses who admit this plainly. I might be mistaken. It felt like, or I don't know what I saw. That humility is part of their power. Even skeptics who frequent the village admit to moments of discomfort. Even the practical landlord admits that sometimes the door doesn't behave as it should. The accounts are not proof. They are human testimonies, fissures in ordinary days where something non-ordinary colonized a moment. What keeps the stories from being merely quaint is the consistent repetition of similar effects. The silence before an event, the anchoring object, the lingering scent, the small ritual left behind. These recur in ways that make residents take note. Repetition is not explanation, but it is pattern. Humans notice patterns, and in Pluckley, the pattern is enough to alter behavior. Echoes beyond the village. As word of Pluckley spread, similar reports arrived from neighboring lanes and parishes. Different in detail, similar in temperament. The motifs migrate. A stone that accepts offerings, a figure at a ford, an object placed at dawn. The proximity suggests that what happens in Pluckley may be part of a larger topography of rural uncanny in Kent and beyond, a set of cultural forms that local communities use to register loss, grief, and the persistence of memory. There's also an economic angle. Ghost tourism brings in money, and with that comes a pressure to present stories in tidy packages that sell. That has a distorting effect, of course. Some villagers lean into it, telling livelier, spookier versions of their experiences. Others clamp down and refuse to take part. The tension between economy and authenticity is another thread in the village's cloth. Final emotional beat. If there's one thing to take away from the 10 encounters we've laid out, it is this. The uncanny in Pluckley is less a parade of spectacled apparitions and more a set of small, intimate breaches of ordinary life. A shadow at the lane's edge, a doll that returns to its bench, a statue that seems to turn its head, a hat left on a wall as if to say goodbye. These are not cinematic reveals so much as private griefs made visible. The terror they generate is not of gore, but of intimacy. That the world you thought you knew can tilt on tiny hinges and leave you feeling seen in ways you never wanted. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine standing at the edge of the ford at 2 in the morning. The water is a black mouth. The hedges are tall, breathless. You hear a thinnest thread of a sound that might be a cry or might be the wind. The hairs on your neck stand. You wish you were elsewhere. That is the human core of these accounts. The wish to be elsewhere. The recognition that elsewhere is not always an option. One final anecdote to close with. A young couple who had moved into a cottage near Sandy Lane told us that after months of small incidents, they set up a small offering themselves. 3 coins, a sprig of rosemary, and a ribbon. They laid it at the milestone, not as a bargain, but as a way to say, "We see you." The next morning, the ribbon was unfurled and lifted, as if someone had waved a hand in thanks. Whether this was coincidence, the wind, or something else, the couple told us it mattered to them. They slept that night without the choke of fear around their throats. This is the strangest mercy in all of it. People making small human responses, candles, ribbons, coins, because mystery is quieter when acknowledged. It doesn't solve things, it rearranges them. Closing synthesis. Across these 10 encounters, the village keeps returning to a handful of images. Hedgerows that become walls, fords that mirror absence, platforms that return objects, stones that collect offerings. The repetition is less about proving anything and more about showing how a community holds its unsayable experiences. The hauntings act like punctuation marks, small, startling commas in the paragraphs of ordinary life. They also show us how landscapes remember. Villages are repositories of memory, and sometimes those memories return. Whether they are the ghosts of people who once lived there, the personifications of grief left unprocessed, or simply human minds straining at the edges of perception, we cannot say. What we can say is that Pluckley's stories have consequences: sleeplessness, departures, small rituals, a change in the way people traverse their lanes. The final honest truth is a humble one. Names and dates can be recorded and doubted, but the sensations, silence, scent, the small objects placed with care, those belong to people. They carry with them the authority of feeling, and feeling, in the end, is what roots a story into a place. If any of these accounts touch a part of you, the part that has felt watched on a quiet road, that remembers a noise that should not have been, that has woken with a cold start and no reason, then you know the shape of what we've been describing. You understand how such incidents can rearrange an everyday life. A single last scene. The churchwarden told us she sometimes thinks of Pluckley as a house with people in the rooms and things on the mantel. Sometimes objects fall behind the clock and make small, inconvenient sounds. You fetch them, you dust them, you decide what to keep. Other times the sounds multiply: an unaccounted-for hat, an extra coin. Then you know the house is not wholly yours. Final CTA. Have you ever felt watched on a country lane? Found an object that shouldn't have been there? If so, tell us in the comments below. Your story could be featured in a future episode. We read every submission and respect your privacy. If you'd prefer anonymity, say so and we'll change names. For more background on Pluckley and a list of sources and suggested readings, check the pinned comment and the description. Share this video with someone who loves true hauntings. And if you want more accounts like these, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you won't miss the next walk into the dark. One last thing before we go. The village keeps its own counsel. It will continue to be both polite and strange, a place where the hedgerows lean a little closer when the moon drops, and where small things find a way of saying goodbye. When you walk the lanes of some place that looks like a postcard, remember that what appears ordinary by day can become a different country at night. Keep your wits, keep your kindness, and if you see a hat on a wall at dawn, leave it be, or tuck in a ribbon. The people who leave things often do so out of a kind of sorrow we do not have names for. There is no tidy ending to stories like these. They fold into daily life, like leaves into soil. They do not ask to be solved. They ask only to be remembered.